Hey there, this is Tom with the Diogenes Lamp podcast. I appreciate you listening in, and most importantly, I hope you enjoy what you hear. Before we start with today's episode, I'm going to ask you for a small favor. Believe it or not, history podcasts, especially in their early stages, tend not to be cash cows. Shocker, I know. I too was blindsided by this news. Now, I didn't go into this for the money, I think that much is obvious. But unfortunately, books, research materials, and equipment aren't free. Please, go to patreon.com/Diogenes Lamp Podcast, and for less than the price of a coffee once a month, you can become a member and get access to bonus episodes, recommended reading lists and documentaries, shout-outs, and anything else we'll offer in the future as this project grows. If you are especially broke, hey, I get it, but please, make sure to give us a 5-star review when you listen to us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, and subscribe to the pod on your preferred podcast listening medium. Your support is appreciated, and more importantly, it is needed in order to keep this operation going. On that note, I hope you have a great day, and now back to the show. Hey everyone, for today's episode I was able to get onto the pod Dr. Spyros Tsoutsoumpis, who is a professor at the University of Manchester and an author of several articles and books on the Greek Civil War. Before I fill you in though on what we talked about, I want to give a big shout out to you all, the people listening to this, and of course my Patreons who continue to support this project financially. This episode will officially be number 50, if you can believe it. I can't believe it personally. This project was supposed to be one of those things that I thought about doing for almost half a decade and then didn't really think much of it, that it wouldn't last long. Yet here I am, 50 episodes later. And here we will also continue. We're going to keep going with all this. A big part, and thanks to you all. To my Patreons, we have Expat Frank, Megas Yorgos, Darth Mater, Rung Ta Wu. Thank you guys so much. Your support makes a huge difference, and it takes a lot of heat off of me financially so that I can focus on this and in sum, keep this project moving. Your financial contributions make a huge difference. I'm not just blowing smoke up your ass. It means a lot. Thank you so much. To my listeners in Qatar and Europe and around the world, please stay safe. You are in my thoughts and prayers, and together we can hope and work towards a better world, free from totalitarianism, greed, corruption, and hopefully wars, which I know is a big ask, so let's just go with at least unnecessary wars. In a world where religious fanaticism is being used to justify violence, we can reflect on what Catherine of Siena said. Quote, "Be who God meant you to be, and you will set the world on fire." Maybe setting the world on fire part, maybe that's not the most apt given today's climate, but you get the point. Together, without the support of the Epstein class, we can rebuild our communities and our world. That's my motivational speech, hopeful motivational speech for the week. It's not often I say stuff like this, but I thought it was appropriate given the current events going on in the world. But back to today's episode. So as I mentioned earlier, I was able to get onto the pod Dr. Spyros Tsoutsoumpis, who is a professor at the University of Manchester and an author of several articles and books on the Greek Civil War. What I didn't mention earlier, though, is that Dr. Tsoutsoumpis has been studying this topic for almost 2 decades, almost 20 years. Aside from writing his book, quote, A History of the Greek Resistance in the Second World War, The People's Armies, quote, he has also read thousands of books, thousands of pages of documents, and he has interviewed hundreds of people whose lives have been either directly or indirectly affected by this conflict. As the conversation progresses, this will become very evident. The conversation itself was supposed to be mostly on EDES and the infamous shift that Zervas took in 1943 when he changed his stance on the king returning to Greece, something we covered last episode. But this event quickly turned into a bigger conversation on the politics and the realities of shifting loyalties and collaboration during the Civil War. We talked about the role that political ambition, opportunism, revenge, and survival all played in the war, and how these, in many cases, served as justifications or excuses as to why one person, one family, or an entire village decided to go with the left or the right, with ELAS or EDES, with the communists or with the Royalists. We also talked about how this event is interpreted and remembered by the diaspora versus in Greece, and ways we can responsibly reflect and remember it. We touched on truly brutal stuff, typical stuff for the times, really: rape, murder, war crimes, that kind of thing. But it hit a little harder this time because the conversation took a turn south, geographically, to my ancestral region of Mani. Totally by coincidence, not planned. For the non-Greek listeners, or just people that don't speak Greek in general, there will be some phrases and words Dr. Tsoutsoumpis and myself use. You'll hear me in the interview say Mikri Moskve, that means little Moscow. Ipurgos means minister, like a government minister. There's a point when Dr. Tsoutsoumpis says Apopuise, he's saying, where are you from? And when he says Mavro Chorio, he means a black village. Vasiliki and Fasistiki means royalist or fascist. Please support Dr. Tsoutsoumpis' work. Buy his book on Amazon. I put the link in the show notes. It's a really great book. I'm almost done reading it. I've read over a dozen books on this topic and many other articles, and there were things that I myself learned. So it's really a great book, a lot of details, a lot of really typical brutal stuff on the topic. Would highly, highly recommend. Additionally, I use it as a source in the podcast. So if that can't attest for it, I don't know what else will. So, yeah. Last note, just reflecting on this conversation as a whole, I really hope that by confronting the past to the point of it becoming uncomfortable, and by acknowledging the events that transpired, honestly acknowledging them and really looking at them, that we may be able to make sure that they never happen again. Enjoy the conversation, guys. So, a big thing that I want to have you on, a big topic of discussion that I thought you could help us out, myself and the listeners with in general, is just on Zervas, but not just on Zervas, more so on the decision he made in 1943 to, kind of profess that he would, I don't know about loyalty to the king, but that he would allow the king to come back. Kind of an unusual move, per se, perhaps. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, for a outfit that called himself, Republican and Venizelist. But given their leader is Zervas, I mean, I know this is a very general question, so feel free to answer in any way or go down any direction. But given that the leader is Zervas, is it that much out of character for this group? I mean, this was surely more than just Napoleon Zervas, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is a complex question, but there is a rather reasonable answer. And Zervas was not the only one. I mean, one of the most notorious figures in Mani was Panos Katsareas, right? Katsareas was the leader of EAOK. He became super royalist from 1945 onwards. He was a liberal, a Venezuelist, something very rare for Mani.
Oh, so there are other people other than Zervas that also switched.
We have a very violent swing of Republicans towards the right around that period, presumably because they saw the king as the lesser evil, and they expected that, if we go that way, then the British might be willing to throw the weight behind us. So it was something out of a political expediency. Just to give you another example, just look at Zervas. Look at all the Pontic Greeks, in and all these Asia Minor groups. initially in mid 1942, most of them, they formed their own autonomous resistance organizations, sometimes cooperating with the arm, sometimes like autonomously. But when the clash but when ELAS tried to monopolize the resistance, all these groups first turned towards the right. Eventually, they turned also towards the Germans, who gave them guns. But even the groups who were not pro-German, let's say Adonis Fosteridis was kind of operating mostly in Eastern Macedonia. He was a die-hard fan of kind of a follower of Venizelos. And from late 1943 onwards, as soon as he began clashing with the left, he also switched towards the monarchy. And in 1947, Adonis Fosteridis was invited personally by King Paul to the palace.
Wow.
He became kind of like a person who was very, very pro-monarchy. So it was, yes, some of these people, they just wanted power, and they wanted power any way that they could, right? But it was also the political expediency. They felt threatened, and amidst the most pertinent example is that Sophocles Venizelos, Lefteris' son, became chums with the king and the royal family in Egypt. And by this period, Sophocles Venizelos has reconciliated himself to the monarchy, because he thought that kind of a reapproachment between the liberals and the monarchies could possibly stop a potential takeover of the left.
Communism was the biggest boogeyman, in other words, more so even than the
Yes,
king and the Metaxas
yes,
clique and all that.
yes, and at the end of the day, even during the Civil War, this became much more intense. Like, it became very, very intense, because obviously this was the biggest threat. Now things began to change again during the 1960s, different conditions. But at the time, yes, it was seen as the foremost kind of threat, as the immediate threat. So the idea was, let's make up now and just do something to deal with communism, and then
Then, as
we'll see
Venizelos, we
how it
can go
goes.
back and forth with us and the monarchists when the communists are out of the picture.
Yeah, yeah.
Wow. I mean, that's a great example you brought up, because Zervas does get a lot of attention as a very big name that flopped or flipped to align himself with the monarchists per se. But you give great examples that it's not just Zervas. There were many Venizelos, many Republicans, like you said, that went
It,
ahead.
yes, it was very, very, very common at the time, and not just among Zervas, but among many. And it was, I mean, it was a broader movement. It was a part of the Civil War. Like, the Civil War radicalized not necessarily simple people, because ordinary people could not always grasp what this meant or what that meant. But definitely among some mass of the population, people shifted towards kind of the right. Or people who are right wing, they became radically right wing. So that was kind of one part. Obviously, there were other followers of Venizelos, of liberal politics, who turned towards the left. There were monarchists who turned towards the left. But the dynamics of civil wars are very complex, and they do not fit towards our kind of preconceptions of how a person should behave, because these are politics done during a period of extreme stress, anxiety, political pressure, violence. So this was a very kind of prominent case. But on top of this, Zervas, well, had two characteristics. Personally, he was very brave. As an individual, he was one of the bravest persons that you could see. But he was also very avaricious. He had very expensive tastes,
Could you talk on
gambling.
that a little bit? Just, it sounds kind of
Yeah,
a
yeah.
funny thing to say
I
about
mean,
a guerrilla
this
leader,
this was well known. So I mean, there was, I mean, and he had kind of an issue with drinking,
Uh,
and so
this is
one
what I've
thing.
heard as well. Him kind of like a sexaholic kind of guy, kind of a womanizer by today's standards, or whatever you want
So
to call it. But
so I mean, Veluchotis was also drunk. Like, this is well known. I mean, But the fact was that, I think that before the Gorgopotamos operation, there's this kind of, I don't know if it's an urban legend or whatever. So they told him, the British asked him, General, what would you like us? Not General, Colonel, anyway. What would you like us to, to get you if you kind of, if the operation succeeds, what we should do? And Zervas told him, send me a case of whiskey. That's
Yeah.
what I can find. Yeah. So
Beautiful.
so that's kind of the thing. And yeah, and it is not very well understood that political lines, and even nowadays, okay, like just don't think Zervas, think J.D. Vance. Like
Right.
he thought that
Marjorie
Trump was
Taylor
like,
Greene,
yeah,
you
he
know.
thought that Trump was like Hitler, and now he's his biggest fan. Green thought like, MAGA forever, and now she can stand the sight of him. So politics are like that.
Right. It's true. Self-preservation above all is, it's the first rule of politics, as they say. And we've said that so many times in our podcast. Zervas is just such an interesting character, though, just, given where we are in our podcast right now, just starting into the first round of the Civil War. And then you look at his past, too, which is also complicated. I mean, sure, a Venizelist, but he almost comes off, from what I've read, and this is, novice level per se. Sure, I have a podcast, but ultimately, I read sources from PhDs and, doctors like yourself. But from what I've read, he seems very ambitious above all, similar to Pangalos, Venizelist and Republican in name, but not above doing whatever it will take to rise to the top of the Greek power politics game.
Exactly.
Right? That's what I've gathered anyways.
Yeah.
Just, the whole fiasco with him and Kondilis in, I think, 1925 or whatever with the Republican battalions and whole coup and all that jazz. Let me ask you this. And I mean, I know the answer is obviously going to be very complicated and whatnot, not a straightforward one. But do you think, okay, so we've established so far that a big driving force behind this move and a lot of moves with Venizelists and Republicans veering more towards the right was seeing communism as the bigger threat, the bigger boogeyman, bigger than the return of the king and everyone that went with the 4th of August regime that helped prop up the 4th of August regime. People like Maniadakis even, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. With that being said, do you think that this move contributed significantly or accelerated or condemned the conflict to the civil war that it would become on the large scale that it became, where,
No, the Civil War was going to happen regardless. I mean, it was pointed that way. What people do not understand is that ELAS was a resistance organization. It was heroic. It did good things. It was patriotic, but it was also the armed branch of a Bolshevik party, and every political party wants power.
Right. Well said.
The kind of the conditions of the war, German brutality, and so on, accelerated this. But that was the aim. I'm not saying that this was the aim from day one. When they fixed the arm, definitely the perception was we want something different in the post-war period. We do not know what this will be. And, we will decide when we understand which way the wind is blowing. I mean, will the Soviets, move down to the Balkans? Will the English kind of predominate? But the idea was that by 1943, especially by the summer of late summer 1943, and the Italians capitulate, then the idea is among the left that, what, we should go that way.
Gotcha. I mean, that's what I've gathered as well. I mean, I'm trying to constantly not forget to remind the listeners this is during, a famine that killed 100,000 plus, right? The brutality of the Axis occupation. These conditions radicalize people in all types of different directions, left, right, center, whatever the case. And we had those conditions were primed for this. So, I mean, it totally makes sense. So, I mean, should we not view Zervas's, I don't want to call it a defection, but political turn as a significant event in that respect?
I mean, in a sense, it was, but there was a shift towards the right among large swaths of the population. People who thought, that ELAS is the next is the best thing after sliced bread. All of a sudden, they change their minds because of ELAS's conduct. And again, what you should bear in mind that these were very localized interactions. So in some places, ELAS might have behaved admirably. In other places, it could have behaved atrociously. So it was always an interaction between what was going on at the ground level and what was going on at the top.
And it's funny because you can
and just get and just an example, like if you look at these villages, let's say there's a village in Messiniaki Man, it's called Castagna, right, which was also your village.
yes.
So Castagna was always a very, very right-wing village because they have big issues with the village that was next to them.
What was the village? I already know the name, but go ahead and say
It
the
was,
name.
it was the village of the Petrulas family. So Castagna and the village next to them, they were always at the throat of each other.
Saidona, Nyohori,
Saidona.
Mikri Moskve.
Yeah,
This
so
is
Saidona,
crazy you're saying this right now. We call it Mikri Moskve.
yeah, so Castagna and Saidona did not really like each other before the war. Like
Yeah.
So families, but
That's so
so it
wild.
was
I'm hearing this right now from you. This is in a live podcast. Keep
so
going.
Castagna and Saidona didn't like everyone before the war. So we know that they did everything that they could to harm each other. Now the fact is that the number one last person was Petrulas, who came from Saidona. Now Petrulas was not so much left wing. Petrulas was a very violent person. It's like he was a very dangerous person. But he joined ELAS mostly because he didn't like the people in Castagna. So they start killing each other. So ELAS in Saidona, they behave very well. In Castagna, they behave very badly. And kind of the rapture was when the Germans, I think, or the Italians executed or arrested some people in Saidona. And the fact is that the people in Castagna denounced the people in Saidona, not because they liked the Italians, but they hated the people in Saidona so much.
Right. This is the personal stories I've heard about the Civil War pretty much are this kind of thing as well, more than anything else.
And this is where we have kind of a series of murders happening. Like, so that is the pattern of the Civil War. The same organization, and you are joining villages, they behave very badly. If you are from Castagna, they will both likely to ask you, από πού είσαι από την Castagna? They could kill you. Because the village was considered μαύρο χωριό. Βασιλικοί, χουντικοί, φασίστες
Right.
κέρατα.
Right.
And Saidona, they ask, από πού είσαι από τη Saidona? Φύγε.
Yeah, that's why we always call Saidona Mikri Moskva. Everyone knows that locally.
Yeah. So that is kind of the pattern of how things develop. Like
there are areas down in, if you're familiar, Selinica. I don't know what they call it now. We call it Selinica. Yeah, I think it's Ayos Dimitrios now. But you can see there's still security battalion and EDES outposts, military outposts. There's one right on the shore, right in downtown Selinica that was used. It looks like a bunker. Honestly, it looks like a military bunker. And it's run down.
It was built in late 1947, early 1948, I think.
Second, third round of the...
Yeah.
Yeah,
so
the stuff I've heard and grew up with stories I heard about things that happened there were really, really bad. I mean, my mom's side is from Argos, and I'm still trying to figure out exactly what happened. All I know is my grandmother's two brothers and father were killed and dumped in some giant hole. The name of the hole, it's like a giant thing, is also called Castagna, the area, ironically enough, right? But that's wild. Did you know that? You didn't know that about me earlier. This is just by chance. What a coincidence.
Yeah, because this is one of the most prominent examples of a very local civil war and of two villages really trying to murder each other. I mean, differences were not that extreme before the war, but the war provides you with the opportunities to do bad things to the other person with no repercussions whatsoever. So that's how civil wars develop.
Yeah. I'll tell you a personal story, and this is another thing. It's the diaspora, I feel like, is very disconnected from that fact. And I mean, if you read about it, you understand that it's not black and white. I'm not saying that. I mean, I kind of am saying that some of these guys, okay, they should be treated as heroes in the respect that maybe they fought the collaboration. But beyond that, I would tread cautiously. Because a lot of these guys, like you're saying, in one village, ELAS were great. In the next, they were murderers or they were just as bad as, A, B, C, or D, or whatever the case, right? In our one village, we had anyways, I don't want to say this, but pretty much, there were people that would be forced into the hites, for example, by gunpoint. And then they would be beaten and then forced into the security battalions later by gunpoint. And it's kind of goes back to what you said earlier, that just because necessarily someone was in ELAS or was in EOK, or the other group that you said that was prominent down in Mani, I forgot, the EAOK, I believe, that you said in your book.
Εθνική Αντικομμουνιστική Οργάνωση Κυνηγών.
Nah, yeah, that one. Or the Hites or so-and-so or whatever security battalion that was local. It doesn't necessarily mean, like you said, that they were diehard for that cause or whatever the case. There's political expediency. At the end of the day, when someone comes into your village with a bunch of guns and you have kids and daughters, things change dramatically in many cases.
It was, I'll tell you one of the war stories, and this story comes not from a left-wing person, but from a right-wing person. Okay, so near Itilo, there was EAOK had a prison, and that was also used as a rape camp.
Jesus.
And we know that one of the people who ran the rape camp later on admitted that they used shepherd dogs to rape both men and women.
Jesus Christ. And you have this is historical documentation, research, and field-based. Because there are people that will not want to believe this. They'll hear this and they'll say, no, it's not possible. You're smearing these people. But we know that's not.
No, the fact is, and I'm not saying this as a kind of the average population in Mani was some of the most ill-educated and some of the poorest people in Greece.
Absolutely.
They were definitely like the people in the deep south. And they are, and they could be, they were more exposed to the elites, and they could do horrible things with no social conscience whatsoever.
Yeah,
so
we've been known for this, and I'm not saying we're proud of it, but my dad's village didn't get running water, electricity, or roads until the junta, I believe in 1974.
And the fact is that these people, the government, the king was shitting on their heads, and they were still going to vote for him. So, yeah.
Aku Stimani in Mani, you are correct in that it is known for being very conservative and very austere. Extremely. The vibe is completely different, for example, when I go to Mani versus when I go to Ikaria. Mind you, those are two polar opposites, of course.
But the big secret is that this social, like Mani before the war, was very divided. There was, one of the first Trotskyist candidates for parliament in Greece was from the Mani.
Wow.
What happened during the civil war is that all the people who are either with Venizelos or with the left, it didn't have to be left wing. It was enough to be a liberal, like even an anti-communist liberal. These people were given two choices. You either join our camp or you die. And during the civil war, approximately 1/4 of the population of Mani, everybody who was not a royalist, fled.
Wow.
I have data for that, right? I have documents. There are documents in newspapers, like a person was going there and they're just, one of the things that they did, okay, was like they suspected you, they know that you are kind of with Venizelos. So what did they do? You had the hitters, they went to your house to do a search, and they planted a handgun. And so we found a handgun. Now you have two choices. You either join us, or we'll just, denounce you for kind of bearing weapons illegal. Now, bearing weapons illegally was kind of was the death penalty offense, right? So people had to leave, or they're telling or they say, like you had, I don't know, 200 olive trees, yes, and I am the head of the local right-wing militia, so I'm going there. So my men need to, we need food, we need guns. So you're gonna, once you sell your crop, you're gonna give us 50%.
Wow.
If you don't give us 50%, they either killed them, or in many cases they doused the olives with gasoline and they set them on fire.
Gosh.
So all the people who are not 100% with the monarchy were driven out by force.
I mean, I've heard the brutality. Excuse my language, but the most fucked up thing that I've heard growing up, and I won't say the family's name because there are kids and grandkids and whatnot, but it was I believe the second or the third round, so towards the end of the Civil War, formally, at least down in that region, when they were cleaning up. And it was the leader of the local communist party or group or whatever on our side of the mountain. And he was hiding in the mountains with his younger son. And I believe it was either the EDES or the security battalions, or maybe the EAOK, the group that you had mentioned. They found him and they tied them both up in chairs. And they skinned the son alive with tuna can tops, made the father watch. And then they did the same thing to the father. And they apparently chopped off both their heads as well and put them on spikes and set it up either in Kalamata, I forgot, either in Kalamata or maybe Ariopoli. I forgot. But I mean, this is the brutality. These are the stories that I grew up with.
Yeah, these were common things. So this is what happened in the area where you had politically motivated. You did not have ethnic cleansing, but you have political cleansing. So people who are not 100% with the far right were thrown out. And that's why you have people like, Γεννηματάς, like ο Υπουργός του Πασόκ. Υπουργός Υγείας του Πασόκ, Γεννηματάς, well, he was from the area. Like, family was left wing, they throw them out. So this happened a lot. So areas like Laconia, Messenia, all the people who did not agree with the status quo during the Civil War were thrown out.
It's like regional brain drain.
More or less, yes. I mean, that is the case.
Exile, regional brain drain, yeah. Jeez, it's just, I mean, you read about these things and whatnot, and that's another thing. I mean, you talk about a lot of this in your book. By the way, Dr. Tsoutsoumpis has a really great book that I mentioned in the intro of this, The People's Armies, it's called, and it actually goes a lot into detail. You actually talk about a lot of resistance groups that I had no idea existed in pretty corners of Greece, pretty like lesser known corners of Greece, like Mani, for example, where you talk about all this stuff. And it just, and it just goes again to show that in the diaspora, we have this notion of, you were a communist and you got exiled, or, oh, my family fought with ELAS and AM and they were this and this. One time there was a girl I was dating and she's like, oh, my papu was in ELAS and he fought the Germans. And that's kind of it. That's the extent of it, of what people understand. Or I had a family member that was killed by the communists or the Germans or the Royalists. And it ends there. And that's a big part of why I wanted to make this podcast, aside from my family's history, where my grandmother's two brothers and her father were tortured and executed and dumped in a mass grave. It's a big part of what motivated me to make this, and why, again, I called it the podcast Diogenes Lamp, right? Diogenes, as we know, Show Me an Honest Man, is because, that's it. I am proud to be a Magnati. I'm proud to be all that. But I don't think that should be mutually exclusive from the truth. And I want to read history. I love history.
People do not carry blood guilt. If, let's say, your father, your grandfather did something horrible, it doesn't reflect on you unless you plan to do the same things, right?
That's a good. I was going to say, yeah. I mean, this is definitely horrific stuff, and it does definitely make me, I don't want to know if it makes me feel less proud per se, but it definitely makes me feel different in reflecting in a different way. Let's put it that way. Because it's horrific stuff. But you're right. We're not our father's children. We're not guilty of the sins of the past.
And obviously there should be some kind of more detached, more balanced kind of debate on that. Then there are two things with the diaspora. The diaspora essentially especially if they don't speak Greek, or if they do not understand the history, if they do not have strong roots, for them it functions kind of like a myth or a feel-good story.
100%.
So it's
without
kind of like a myth. Yeah. In Greece proper, it can be mobilized for political purposes. So that's the difference. I mean, passions kind of and these narratives work in different ways. Okay, obviously. So I mean, that's one of the reasons that many people in diaspora, they just think, this happened. Maybe this is kind of a mythical story. It's kind of part of a family folktale, of a family past. And sometimes it can be kind of, if, let's say, I'm right wing and my family, let's say, moved to the States and they voted Republican, maybe I can just fit this into kind of
Right. I
my
can blame
narrative.
it on that. It
Yeah.
fits exactly. It
Yes.
justifies it.
Or if I'm a Democrat and I had a grandpa in ELAS, kind of, maybe, our family was always kind of, was always progressive, let's say. In Greece, obviously, the stakes are higher because you mobilize these narratives during elections, you mobilize these narratives to contest politics and so on. So people have a kind of a more direct knowledge. But in both cases, the history of the period is largely mythological. More or less, it is contentious, it is mythological. There is the civil war aspect. The people sometimes are being fed and they're being mobilized along the lines of these myths. So definitely that's something that happened in money 80 years ago cannot characterize a person. The story is more complex. People in the money will say we're always royalist. The answer will be yes, but
Right.
there was a very strong anti-royalist element as well. There was a very strong communist movement. The Hittes would have not appeared in the money unless ELAS was really powerful, and it was powerful. And it was not powerful solely because people believed in communism. They had no idea. They could not explain the basic tenets of communism or of royalism in any tangible way. They joined a movement because of loyalty to their extended kin. They joined a movement because they hated the Germans or the Italians, or they hated their neighbor who was kind of who had sided before with this side or that side. So people became politicized as the war went on. But sometimes it did not even become politicized. They just wanted to brave the storm by joining ELAS for a year or 2 years or 3 years, and then they would shift again. And then they would shift again, because that's the nature of politics.
Right.
And if
Again,
if
yeah.
we if we understand that politics are malleable, because people do not give 100% of the time for politics. People have kids, they have families, they have brothers, sisters, wives, dependents. So it's very easy to say, I'm going to give everything for the struggle, I'm going to give everything for the king or for the resistance. But people do not think that way. They think, what about my family? What about my parents?
Right. What would
So,
you do for
uh,
them if you were in the same situation?
so
Probably almost anything, right?
ultimately, what we have to understand is that activists, militants, are always a minority. Let me give you this example. There was a relatively, how, there was this British officer, who was parachuted into Britannia. His name was John Ponder, and he was a classics teacher. He had a degree from Cambridge. He spoke Greek relatively well, and 30 years after he kind of 40 years after he left Greece, he published a small volume with his memoirs, a small hardback volume, and the volume was titled Patriots and Scoundrels. Why? Because of Samuel Johnson idea that patriotism is the last refuge of the scoundrel. What did he wanted to say? That the Greeks were scoundrels? No. What he wanted to say is that many people who sided fanatically with one side or the other did not do this because they had a genuine belief, but they did this because they were scoundrels disguised as patriots, either of the left or of the right. And the people who and the average person, yes, you could be patriotic, but you could also care for your family or for your kids. You could say, I mean, this is what I interviewed one person like 12 years ago in Epirus, and I asked him, why didn't you join kind of the guerrillas? He was a very brave man, personally. He said, because my parents were living with me, and because I had a wife and two young kids. What would have happened to them if I
Right.
left? They had nobody.
That simple. Yeah. In
Because
that sense.
he was the only adult man in his extended family. Even his brother was 15, 16 years old. Okay, different times, but not fully grown. And he was the only person physically able to defend them, but also to provide for them. So we have to understand these things. And we have to understand, as Nietzsche said, like human, all too human. These are the people. This is the experience.
Wow.
And even going back to Zervas, why he switched towards that. Zervas was always ambitious. Okay, many people were ambitious. Zervas also had a very bad experience in 1942. If you want some background on Zervas, like he goes to the mountains for the XYZ reasons, and he finds himself in the uplands of an area called Valtos in Italy. And Valtos is one of it is a bit like money. It is very rugged. very very right wing, people in love with guns and feuds and all that kind of stuff. And people in Valtos actually tried to turn in Zervas to the Italians because because he was not a monarchist. So monarchists hunted Zervas down. Okay, Zervas escapes in the nearby province, in the nearby area of Arta, and he is protected there by some of his former comrades in the Liberal Party. And a few months after he was chased down by Royalists, ELAS appears under Gerasimos Maltezos, also local men, and he actually threatened Zervas, kind of indirectly, you're kind of with us, you're against us, why have an independent organizations? Why not join with us? And Zervas writes in his diary that, I suspect that these people just want to, kind of destroy my organization. They want my head. So Zervas was not in love either with the monarchists or with the royalists. What happens there is that Zervas at some point is in really dire straits, has no options. He has an option to retain his purity. I'm from Epirus, half of me is like from Marta, where Zervas began. My mom is from Marta, and my father is from Thesprotia, and Zervas' origins were from Thesprotia, from the Tsuli area.
Right.
Okay, so I
he's
have
your hometown hero, in other words, kind of.
Yeah.
Not that he's for you specifically, but for your region. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there are statues of Zervas everywhere, right? There is Othos Zerva, Leoforos Zerva, and so on. So I have no beef with the man. I'm not his admirer, but I grew up in an environment that admired him. Having said that, the fact that he was extremely ambitious and was in really dire straits, that was the one thing that he saw an easy way out. He could have said, you know what, I'm not joining. The English would have provided Zervas with guns and ammunitions regardless. But Zervas thought maybe it's a bit safer for me. Maybe I'll play it safe. Maybe he also had his mind in a post-war career in politics. At the same time, Zervas needed volunteers. He needed support. And there is also the other thing, like he appealed to, he tried to patch things with the king because he wanted to attract also monarchists and royalists. And by late 1943, had a lot of monarchists and a lot of royalists joining Zervas.
Wow.
Zervas was a red flag. But even the monarchists who are in Zervas, they actually hated him. We have British documents that actually demonstrate that there were royalist conspiracies to arrest Zervas and for the royalists to take over the organization. There were conspiracies from liberal, kind of left-leaning Venezuelans to arrest Zervas and to take over the organization. EDES was chaos. It was a very, very chaotic organization. And Zervas, at the end of the day, he was extremely ambitious. Like, if you want to understand a bit of his background, like his family comes from Suli, they fight in the 1821 revolution. They play a very major role. They lost like 60, 70 family members.
Wow.
The revolution. So there was an armed unit only with Zervas family members. Zervas. Okay?
Yeah, these are like a giant entire clans, entire tribes, pretty much. Yeah.
Yeah. So the family kind of gets decimated. They get some land in the area of Agrinio and of Arta, and his father is a tailor. But his father is kind of an irredentist. He's a nationalist. He collaborates with this kind of irredentist guerrilla forces that kind of cross the Ottoman border. But he's also a fixer. We know that his dad was also running guns. He was kind of a broker for all these bandit gangs that operate in the border. So Zervas grew up in this. He grows up in poverty, in a very marginalized area, in a family that has a big military tradition and a tradition of kind of former martial glory. And this is what he wants. Zervas wants to use his ability for violence to rise up socially, and he doesn't really care. At some point, and yes, let's say Zervas, during kind of the General Pangalos dictatorship, he and the Demokratika Tagmata, which I believe you have explained to the people who hear the show.
I had an episode where we talked about this, like in 1925.
So Zervas actually is being bribed to turn against Pangalos.
Right.
He gets a bribe, and then he tries to turn against the government because
by
he thinks
Bolsodakis, from what I remember, right? It's Bolsodakis who helped funnel money.
Yeah, Bolsodakis. So the Demokratika Tagmata are out. Pangalos is out. Demokratika Tagmata are still powerful. So Zervas thinks, why not try dictatorship? Why not try to blackmail the government again? The Demokratika Tagmata are being demolished.
Yeah, the
Zervas is
Republican
being tried.
battalions.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Zervas is being tried for kind of for conspiracy and so on, but he goes out of prison. And he's halfway in, halfway out in politics. We know that at the time he's involved with kind of criminal activities, with gambling, definitely. And we know he was involved with some racketeering, like protect kind of providing protection to gambling dens. There are these rumors, which are probably true. In the 1930s, during the Metaxas dictatorship, Zervas again thinks, you know what? First, I hate Metaxas because Metaxas is the king's man, but you know what? How about a nice little conspiracy? How about trying to overthrow this? And Zervas,
Naturally.
and Zervas is very distrustful. Like one of the little known things is that Zervas was from Epirus, okay? But none of the men in his entourage was from Epirus. They were all Cretans. You know why?
Wow,
Because
that's
because
quite a
yeah,
contrast there.
because the Cretans were absolutely devoted to him. If something happened to Zervas, they were going to skin them alive because they didn't really like them. The
There's
locals
like
didn't like them.
Varangian Guard. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So he always had these people around him, always. And they're absolutely dependent from them, and he was absolutely, and vice versa. But he did this for security reasons. Like the fact was that if the locals wanted to kill Zervas, he had 3, 4 bodyguards. He would not escape. But nonetheless, he thought, you know what? These people are dependent on me. They can be my bodyguards, my protectors, my snitches, my anything.
Right. Anything I need him
So
to be.
this shows how distrustful he was.
These guys, so many of them. I mean, Zervas, okay, and Aris. There's so many characters. I don't know what else to call them aside from that in the Civil War in this era. I mean, even people. I mean, Kondilis, for example. I mean, another amazing character, really big character. Another guy who switched allegiances. Right, was a considerably
Cordelis,
diehard Venizelos. Then he becomes a monarchist right before he dies. Right, in 1935
exactly,
or so.
and he also wanted to become a dictator. Like that was the
Right,
ultimate aim.
as well.
Something like the Greek version of Mussolini.
Right. Yeah. He
So
loved Mussolini. Yeah.
so you had all these people, like and the switching between sides was incredible.
So chaotic. It took me so long just to get used to that, just to get through the 30s, the Second Republic, if I understand. The interwar period from
Yeah.
24 to
So
36. Oh
so
my
that was
gosh.
so that was how people operated at the time.
Bonkers. Absolutely bonkers. I mean, we flew over it in our podcast because, I just used it as a primer into the Civil War, and we zoomed in on a bit when talking about Zervas and whatnot, but it's really chaotic. And, another thing I grew up as, okay, I'm Magnati on my dad's side, but my papu was a big Venizelist. My papu's dad fought supposedly, so goes the story, fought under Plastiras in his Evzon unit. And he had a Plastiras poster on his wall, my pro papu apparently, so I've heard. So I always grew up, Venizelos, all hail, whatever. And then I'm reading about this, and I read about how when the security battalions were created, and this is kind of the point where we're at in our podcast with under the Royalist government, a lot of Venizelos, again, just like we talked about how the communists seem to be the bigger boogeyman than the 4th of August regime or the whole join the security battalions along with monarchists.
Obviously, because for you don't forget that Venizelos introduced the Idionymo.
Right, 1929,
which was kind of a specialized legislation targeting the Greek Communist Party. So Venizelism had a very right-wing function and a very left-wing kind of function. Like the Venizelist right threw the lot in with the security battalions, again, not because they liked the Germans, but because they thought, you know what? The Germans are leaving. The biggest threat right now is the left.
People like Pangalos.
Yes, but even the people who like Pangalos kind of one of the little known stories is that some of the people like who are Pangalos's bodyguards, they came from Pangalos was an Arvanitis, right? From this community, from Elefsina.
Interesting. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. So Pangalos's bodyguards came from a village called Aspropyrgos, and these people joined the security battalion after a member of their extended clan was murdered by ELAS. So they joined Pangalos just to get revenge against the family that murdered the kinsman. And these are Pangalos' kind of personal bodyguard. They're absolutely devoted to him. They're Arvanitika speakers, Albanian speakers like Pangalos. So it's kind of like a small private army. And ELAS tries to murder like Pangalos for a couple of times. They fail. So this is very, very tribal as well. This is political. This is tribal. And you have what gives civil wars their virulence. Civil wars are not just a political conflict. It's a political conflict that interacts with personal politics, with local politics, with communal politics. And that's what makes it very complex, very bitter, very unstable. And that's why people change sides all the time. If you want an equivalent, like think Missouri, like during the American Civil War, I think that there is kind of I think there was a 1990s film about that.
It's overlooked a lot. I don't know much about. I know Bleeding Kansas and whatnot, but
I mean, there is very interesting films titled "Ride with the Devil" or something of that sort, and it shows how people in Missouri, like they formed their allegiance to the Union or to the Confederacy. It was not so much because they believed in the one thing or the other. Some of them were very strong believers in slavery or under slavery, but you had ordinary people who choose one side because the neighbor picked the other side, because somebody was owning the money, because somebody's fence was kind of.
You wanted their Horafe, you wanted their olive oil fields, whatever,
et
cetera, et cetera.
So this is it. Like this is what people should recall about that. Yes, politics were important, but politics was seen through the local perspective, and this local perspective interacted with the national perspective and the international perspective. So it was very, very, very complex.
Wow.
And when we talk about complex issues, yes, there is the issue of morality. Joining the Germans, joining the Wehrmacht was, in a sense, yes, it was fundamentally very moral. If you see the broader picture, if you see the small picture, it can be rationalized and explained. I'm not saying, give them a medal. Far from it. But it should not be seen simply as a moral choice or a political choice, but a very complex decision during a period of profound strain and extreme violence.
Yes. That's what I've kind of gathered as well. I mean, many people in Mani, EDES most notably, a lot of security battalions collaborated with the Nazis, with the Germans as well, et cetera, to kill the communists and whatnot. But exactly like you said, and like we stated before, it's much easier to judge people, us in our chairs with air conditioning in a time of peace and stability. At that time, entire villages were getting burned down and everyone was getting executed if just a couple of ELAS units just walked through a village, possibly, right? I mean, the consequences were very real.
Exactly. So that's the thing. Civil war should not be. I'm not saying overlook morality, right?
Right.
All of them things is these are very complex situations.
Extremely nuanced.
You cannot simplify them. And the first thing is like engage the respectful way. Like I'm sorry that people who fight in the comment sections of Facebook and like swearing at each other, they're psychopaths. And I'm afraid that these people would be the most prone ones to do evil under extreme circumstances. These are the scoundrels.
Right.
How do you make an argument by swearing or threatening each other on your social media? Like
those who make you believe crazy things can make you do crazy things. I think Cicero said that, or whoever.
Exactly. So this is kind of the strain of the era was unbelievable. People should understand this, and they should not read it in a different way.
Beautiful. This was a great talk, Dr. Tsoutsoumpis. Thank you so much. I learned a lot of stuff. I'm still flabbergasted, blown away that you mentioned my father's village. That was not planned for the listeners at all. So we'll have to talk more about that in the future. But thank you so much.